My name is Lauren, and I was my mom's first child. She had me at a time when she was still trying to figure out who she was and what she wanted from life. My mom got married young, right after high school, to my dad, Scott. They were high school sweethearts, completely in love, but they didn't have much more than that. Money was tight, and they struggled to make ends meet. At first, they didn't mind because they had each other, but as time went on, the pressure began to weigh on them. It was hard to keep the love alive when they were constantly worried about paying bills and putting food on the table. I was still just a little kid when everything changed. My mom met Kyle, a man who seemed to have everything my dad didn't. He had money, a fancy car, and the kind of confidence that comes with knowing you've made it in the world. My mom was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. She saw in him a way out of the life she was living, a chance at something better. So she left my dad, packed our things, and took me with her, leaving behind the life we had known. She never looked back, except when it was time to collect the alimony checks, which seemed more like a formality than a connection to the past. At first, Kyle seemed like a dream come true. He would bring me little gifts, things I had never seen before, and let me play in his big, impressive office. The office was filled with all kinds of shiny, expensive things, polished wood furniture, glass sculptures, and gadgets that I wasn't allowed to touch. It felt like a different world, one where everything was smooth and perfect on the surface. But even as a child, I could sense something was off. My mom started to change around Kyle. She became more tense, more focused on appearances and what other people thought. She started to look at me differently, too, as if I were a reminder of a life she was trying to erase. Her eyes would narrow slightly when she looked at me, like I was something that didn't quite fit into the new life she was trying to build. I remember one evening clearly. I was supposed to be watching TV in the living room, but the sounds of their voices carried from the kitchen. I could hear the sharp edge in my mom's voice as she spoke to Kyle. "She's too much like Scott," my mom said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. Always asking questions, always looking at me like he used to. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time, but I knew it wasn't good. It hurt to hear her talk about me like I was a burden, something that didn't belong. Despite everything, I loved my real dad. He lived in a small, cramped apartment on the other side of the city, but it was always full of warmth and laughter whenever I was there. Even though he didn't have much, he made the most of what he had. We would spend hours in the park, playing on the swings or kicking a ball around. Sometimes, he'd take me to get pizza at this little place around the corner from his apartment. The pizza wasn't anything fancy, just a cheap slice with extra cheese, but it was always perfect because we were together. My mom's words from that night in the kitchen stayed with me, though, like a bruise that wouldn't heal. Over time, her criticism became more constant, more biting. "Can't you do anything right?" she'd snap whenever I tried to help with the chores or did my homework in the living room. Nothing I did seemed to meet her standards. My dad, on the other hand, was always encouraging. "You're doing great, Lauren," he'd say, his voice full of pride, whenever I showed him my grades or a drawing I'd done at school. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words were like a shield, protecting me from the harshness of my mom's criticism. But as I got older and started school, life at my mom and Kyle's house became even more stressful. My mom became obsessed with how things looked to others. She was constantly on me about wearing the right clothes, making sure I fit in with the right kids. "Why can't you dress like Karen's daughter? Look at her," she'd say, shoving a picture in my face. The girl in the picture was perfect, with her neat hair and spotless dress, smiling at a party I hadn't been invited to. One day, after I accidentally tracked mud into the hallway, my mom lost it. She yelled at me, her face red with anger, and I finally snapped. "At least Dad doesn't yell about a bit of dirt," I shouted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. The slap came so fast I didn't even see it coming. Her hand connected with my cheek, the sting of it shocking me into silence. "Don't talk about your father like that," she hissed, her face close to mine, her breath hot and smelling of coffee and anger. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back, just like Dad had taught me. He always told me not to cry in front of people who wanted to hurt you, to stay strong no matter what. That night, as I lay in bed, the house felt colder than usual. I made a promise to myself, I wouldn't let her see me cry. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd hurt me. When my mom announced she was pregnant again, the entire atmosphere in the house shifted. It was like a storm had settled over us, dark and heavy, with a tension that never quite lifted. Something big was about to change, and I could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. It was the kind of change that made my stomach twist in knots, the kind that brought a cold, creeping dread instead of excitement. Mom had that unmistakable glow that everyone talks about when a woman is expecting, a glow that radiated from her every pore, lighting up the room and drawing people to her like moths to a flame. But no matter how bright she shone, that light never seemed to reach me. It was as if I was standing in her shadow, unseen and forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mom announced her news with a smile that could have outshone the sun itself. "I'm having a baby with the man I love, Kyle. It's going to be perfect," she said, her hand resting tenderly on her growing belly. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of joy and anticipation, and I could see her already imagining the life she would have with Kyle and their new baby. Kyle, sitting beside her, grinned from ear to ear like he'd just won the lottery. "We'll need to redo the guest room," he chimed in, his voice full of that easy charm he always used. "Make it fit for a little princess." At his words, my heart plummeted, crashing down into the pit of my stomach. They weren't talking about the guest room, I realized with a sickening jolt. They were talking about my room. The only place in the world where I felt like I had any space at all. My voice wavered as I tried to mask the panic bubbling up inside me. "What about my room?" Mom's expression shifted slightly, her smile tightening into something strained and unyielding. She looked at me with a gaze that left no room for discussion, her tone firm and final. "You can move into the smaller room, Lauren," she said, as if she were stating a simple fact. "It's only fair. The baby will need the space." The word fair hung between us, heavy and cold, like a door slamming shut. It was clear that this decision had already been made, long before I had a chance to voice my thoughts or feelings. My heart ached with the realization that I didn't really have a choice in the matter. So, I did what was expected of me. I packed up my things, trying not to let the tears fall, and moved into the smallest room in the house, a tiny space that felt more like a storage closet than a bedroom. It was cramped and dark, with barely enough room for my bed and a small dresser, but it was all that was left for me. Time seemed to slip away after that, passing in a blur of days that felt both too long and too short. Before I knew it, Mary was born, and she became the sun around which our entire world revolved. She was all anyone ever talked about, the center of every conversation, the focus of every bit of attention. "Isn't she just the most beautiful baby you've ever seen?" Mom would gush to her friends over the phone, her voice filled with pride and adoration as she cradled Mary in her arms. She held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, as if nothing else mattered. "Yeah, she's cute," I would mutter under my breath, trying to join in on the conversation, but feeling like an outsider. In truth, cute was a gross understatement. Mary was beyond adorable, with her chubby cheeks, bright eyes, and a smile that could melt even the coldest heart. Despite everything, I couldn't help but love her from the moment I first laid eyes on her. I wanted so badly to be a good big sister, to be involved in her life, to help out in any way I could. One afternoon, while Mom was busy in the kitchen, I saw my chance to spend some time with Mary. I tiptoed into her room, my heart pounding with excitement and a little bit of nerves. As I approached her crib, I peered over the edge, watching her tiny hands wave in the air as she gurgled happily. "Hey there, Mary," I whispered softly, reaching out a finger for her to grab, hoping to feel that small connection. But before I could even touch her, I heard Mom's footsteps, and she appeared in the doorway, her face clouded with irritation. Her voice was sharp and cutting as she spoke. "What are you doing, Lauren? I told you to ask before going into her room." I jerked my hand back, stung by the reprimand. "I just wanted to see her," I protested weakly, feeling the familiar sting of tears welling up in my eyes. I had only wanted to help, to be close to my baby sister, but it seemed that even that small wish was too much to ask. Mom's words cut deep, leaving me feeling like I was somehow in the way, like I was a burden instead of a part of the family. But Dad was different. During one of my weekends with him, while we were sitting in our favorite pizza place, I finally opened up about what had been weighing on my heart. "Mom's always on edge when I'm around Mary," I confessed, picking at the cheese on my slice of pizza. "It's like she thinks I'll break her or something." Dad looked at me with a thoughtful expression, taking a moment before he spoke. "You know, Lauren, some people just have a hard time sharing love. It's like they think there's only so much to go around, and they hold on tight to what they have. But remember, you've got a big heart. Don't let your mom's behavior make you think otherwise." His words gave me some comfort, a small reminder that I was still loved, even if it didn't always feel that way. But when I returned to Mom's house, the distance between us only seemed to grow wider. Every time I tried to share something about my life, stories about school, my friends, anything, Mom's attention was always divided. She was only half listening, her focus always split between me and Mary. One day, I came home with a school award, a second-place ribbon from the science fair. I was so proud of myself, clutching the certificate in my hands like it was the key to finally earning their approval. "Look, Mom! I won this!" I exclaimed, holding the certificate out to her with a hopeful smile as she fed Mary. "That's nice, dear," she said absent-mindedly, not even glancing up from Mary. "Put it on the fridge or something." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Or something," I echoed under my breath, feeling the excitement drain out of me like air from a balloon. I walked over to the fridge and stuck the certificate on the door, the paper hanging slightly crooked. I stepped back and looked at it, realizing that to them, it was just another piece of paper, nothing special. Just another day living in Mary's shadow. By the time I reached high school, things had gotten worse. The atmosphere at home was tense, filled with cold shoulders and indifference. I felt like a guest in my own home, someone who didn't quite belong. It was during this difficult time that the final blow came. Mom decided that it was time for me to live with Dad permanently. She broke the news to me one evening over dinner. It was one of those rare nights when it was just the two of us at the table. Kyle was working late, and Mary was already asleep. Mom's voice was cool and detached, like she was discussing a business transaction rather than my future. "Lauren, we need to talk about your future," she said, pushing her food around her plate without looking at me. My heart started to race, anxiety twisting in my chest. "What about it?" I asked, trying to sound calm, even though a part of me already knew what was coming. We had been having several serious discussions lately, and it seemed like the time had come for a decision to be made. My mother and stepfather sat across from me at the kitchen table, their expressions a mixture of concern and resolve. After a moment of awkward silence, my mother finally spoke, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of what she was about to say. "We've been talking a lot, and we both think it's best if you move in with your father," she began, carefully choosing her words. "With the new baby on the way, things here are, well, they're complicated." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I almost choked on the sip of water I had just taken. "Move in with Dad?" I blurted out, my voice rising in disbelief. "But why? I thought everything was fine here." My mother let out a heavy sigh, one that seemed to carry all the frustrations and challenges she had been holding back. "Lauren, you're not a child anymore," she said, her tone growing more firm, yet still tinged with that underlying impatience. "You need your own space, and we just can't provide that here, not with the new situation. It's cramped, and frankly, the financial burden is more than we expected. It's better for everyone this way." I pushed my plate away, suddenly losing my appetite. The idea of moving in with my dad had never crossed my mind, and the thought of leaving everything behind made my stomach turn. "What about school? What about my friends?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "You can go to a new school, make new friends," my mother replied as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if my entire life could be neatly swapped out like an old piece of furniture. It felt as though I was expected to erase my existence here and start over without any complications. The next few weeks passed in a daze, each day blending into the next as I packed up my belongings. My once vibrant life was now being reduced to a series of cardboard boxes, books, clothes, and a handful of keepsakes that still held meaning for me. When the time came to say goodbye, Kyle barely acknowledged my departure, and Mary, too young to grasp the gravity of the situation, gave me a confused hug that only deepened my sense of isolation. Moving day arrived, and it was as tough as I had feared. My dad lived on the other side of town in a small apartment, far removed from the neighborhood I had always known. The apartment was clean, but it was cluttered with remnants of a life that had been put on hold ever since my mom had left him. As I walked in, I saw him standing there, his arms open and a worried smile on his face, trying his best to make me feel welcome. The apartment was nothing like the house I had grown up in. My new room was half the size of my old one, with walls that desperately needed a fresh coat of paint and a window that offered a dreary view of a brick wall. But it was quiet, and my dad was doing everything he could to make it feel like home. The first day at my new school was every bit as difficult as I had imagined. As I walked down the crowded hallways, I could feel the stares of curious eyes and hear the whispers that followed me. "That's the new girl," they murmured as if I were some kind of oddity. In class, I kept to myself, doodling in my notebook and trying to block out the incessant murmurs. When the bell rang, I was the first to rush out the door, not wanting to linger in the suffocating atmosphere. At home, my dad noticed the change in my demeanor almost immediately. "How was school?" he asked one evening, trying to keep his tone light and encouraging. "It was fine," I lied, shrugging off my coat and dropping my bag by the door. I didn't have the heart to tell him how out of place I felt, how lonely I had become. "If it gets tough, you tell me, okay? We're in this together." "You're not alone, Lauren," he said, his words full of sincerity. And while his reassurance meant a lot to me, the loneliness I felt ran deep. It wasn't just about missing my old friends or the spacious house I had grown up in. It was about feeling unwanted, like I had been pushed out of my own life because I was too much of a burden. Adjusting to life at Dad's wasn't easy, but I soon realized that I had to pull myself together, or things would only get worse. One morning, as I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling of my cramped room, I made a decision. I had to take charge of my life because no one else was going to do it for me. If I don't make a change, I'll end up stuck here, I muttered under my breath, resolving to do whatever it took to build a future for myself. My dad noticed the shift in my attitude almost immediately. One morning over breakfast, he looked up from his coffee and said, "You're looking more determined these days, Lauren. What's on your mind?" I stirred my cereal thoughtfully, searching for the right words to express what I had been feeling. "I want to make something of myself, Dad. I don't want to end up stuck, you know?" He nodded, a serious expression crossing his face. "I hear you, kiddo. So, what's the plan?" "That scholarship," I said, feeling a surge of determination as I spoke. "The big one for the top students. I'm going to get it." His smile was all the encouragement I needed. "I know you can do it, Lauren. Just tell me what you need from me." From that moment on, I threw myself into my studies with a newfound vigor. School was tough, with long hours spent catching up on material I had missed, and even longer evenings buried in books. My teachers began to notice the change in me, even the ones who had always been the toughest on me. Mr. Jeremy, my math teacher, pulled me aside after class one day. "Lauren, your work has improved a lot," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "What's driving this sudden change?" "I need that scholarship," I replied bluntly, packing up my books. "I've got plans, and they don't include being stuck here." Mr. Jeremy studied me for a moment, his eyes thoughtful, before nodding slowly. "Well, keep at it, and let me know if you need extra help. I'm here." His words were reassuring, but making friends wasn't easy. I managed to find a few people who didn't mind that I was laser-focused on my goals. During lunch, I'd sit with Linda and Peter, two kids who weren't exactly popular but knew how to laugh. One day, as we sat down with our lunch trays, Peter nudged me with a grin. "So, Lauren, you're like a library ninja now, huh?" I cracked a smile and replied, "Yeah, got to be stealthy if I want to snag the best study spots." Linda chimed in, her voice soft but sincere. "It's cool what you're doing, Lauren. Most people wouldn't bother." Days turned into months, and the pressure grew as college application deadlines loomed closer. Through it all, my dad was my rock. He was always there with a hot meal and a listening ear whenever the stress became overwhelming. The day I received the scholarship letter, my hands were shaking as I tore it open. Dad stood right beside me, holding his breath. I scanned the words, my heart pounding, and then I let out a cheer so loud the neighbors probably heard. "I got it, Dad. I got it." I jumped up, the letter flapping in my hand like a victory flag. Dad swept me up in a big hug, laughing and cheering right along with me. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." A few months later, as I packed up my things for college, I felt ready. The future was bright, and for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine. I was leaving home, but I was taking all these lessons, all this love, and hard-earned wisdom with me. After graduating with honors and establishing a solid career, I finally felt like I was on stable ground. At 25, I was doing well at my job and had just started dating a great guy from work named Eric, who had been nothing but supportive. Then, out of the blue, my mom called. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, but suddenly here she was, making a demand disguised as a request. "Lauren, your sister Mary is going to college in your city. We've paid her tuition, and we think it would be best if she stayed with you," Mom said, making it clear this wasn't just a suggestion. I hesitated, memories of our strained relationship flooding my mind, but I wanted to believe things could be different this time. "Okay, Mom. I'll help Mary out. It might be nice to reconnect," I said, trying to keep any doubts out of my voice. Mary moved in 2 weeks later, and it was obvious right away that we were very different. She was as stunning as ever, completely focused on her looks and living a high-maintenance lifestyle. She brought with her a suitcase full of expectations and a personality that demanded they be met. "Can you make sure we have almond milk and kale?" "I'm on a special diet," Mary said casually on her first evening, checking herself out in the mirror. "Sure, I'll add them to the grocery list," I replied, trying to be accommodating. But living with Mary turned out to be harder than I expected. She partied like there was no tomorrow, often coming home at dawn, her carefree laughter echoing through the apartment while I lay awake worrying about work meetings and presentations. One afternoon, Eric came over while Mary was getting ready for another night out. I noticed how she smiled at him, just a bit too sweetly and for a bit too long. After she left, Eric spoke up, "Lauren, I think Mary's got the wrong idea about me. She's been, well, flirty." A wave of anger and embarrassment washed over me. "Thanks for telling me, Eric. I'll talk to her." When I confronted Mary, she just laughed it off. "Oh, come on, Lauren. I'm just being friendly. Besides, can I help it if he likes me back? That's my fiancé, Mary. You need to respect that," I replied, my voice firm. Her laugh turned cold. "Lauren, I'm used to getting what I want. I always have. That was the last straw. I couldn't live like this, feeling like I had to guard my life from my own sister. You need to find another place to live, Mary. This isn't working out, I said, making it clear that I meant it. Mary stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Mom, and her voice was cold and sharp. You're such a jealous girl, Lauren. You can't stand to see your sister happy, can you? I just want respect, Mom, that's all, I replied, but it was like talking to a wall. After that, things went quiet between Mary and me. I heard through the grapevine that she had dropped out of college and was drifting through her social circles on charm and whims. As for me, I refocused on my life with Eric, my work, and rebuilding my boundaries. 3 years flew by since I last tried to patch things up with my family. Things were going well for me. I was moving up at work, and life with Eric was better than ever. That's when I heard the news about Mary. She had dropped out of college and was getting married to some rich guy she'd met. Feeling a mix of curiosity and goodwill, I picked up the phone to call home and offer my congratulations. Mom answered, her voice cold and distant as always. Mom, I heard about Mary's wedding. I just wanted to say congratulations, I started, trying to keep my tone light. Well, don't bother. We're not waiting for you at the wedding. It's for rich people only, and we don't need any beggars there, she spat out, her words cutting deep. I clenched the phone a little tighter, feeling the old sting of rejection. Really, Mom? That's how it is? Lauren had always been the difficult one in her mother's eyes. It was a label she had grown accustomed to over the years, a weight she carried in every interaction with her family. So, when her mother coldly dismissed her on the phone, it wasn't entirely unexpected, but it still hurt deeply. What did you expect? Her mother said sharply, her voice filled with disdain. Just stay away, Lauren. With those final words, her mother hung up, leaving Lauren standing there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. The dial tone echoed in the room, a harsh reminder of the conversation's abrupt end. The hurt was raw, a deep, gnawing pain in her chest. But as much as it stung, Lauren was determined not to let it destroy her. She had been through worse, and she would survive this too. Time passed, and Lauren tried to move on, but she couldn't escape the news about her sister Mary's wedding. Her parents had spared no expense, turning the event into a spectacle of opulence. They had hired popular artists to perform, actors to mingle with the guests, and decorated the venue like something out of a fairy tale. It was the kind of wedding that people would talk about for years. But while Mary's wedding was a display of wealth and status, Lauren's life was quietly moving in a different direction. Eric proposed to Lauren not long after, and their engagement brought a sense of joy and anticipation. Their wedding wasn't going to be anything extravagant, but it was going to be filled with love, sincerity, and the warmth of people who truly cared about them. The planning was simple but meaningful. Every decision was made with care and thoughtfulness, ensuring that the day would be a reflection of their love rather than their bank account. Lauren decided to call her father to share the happy news. She dialed his number, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. When he answered, his voice was warm and full of joy, just as she had hoped. Lauren, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you, her father exclaimed, his voice brimming with pride and happiness. You bet I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Her father's reaction filled Lauren with hope and courage. Encouraged by his support, she decided to reach out to her mother one last time. She knew it was a risk, but she wanted her mother to be a part of this special moment in her life. She dialed the number with trembling hands, her heart racing as the phone rang. When her mother finally answered, Lauren's voice was filled with nervous anticipation. Mom, I'm getting married, she began, her words tentative. I really want you to come. It would mean a lot to me. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that felt like an eternity. Then her mother's voice came through, cold and dismissive, like a gust of icy wind. No, Lauren, she said sharply. I'm not interested in attending some modest gathering of losers. Count me out. The words hit Lauren like a punch to the gut. She felt a lump form in her throat, but she forced herself to swallow it down, to keep her composure. All right, Mom. Take care, she said softly, before ending the call. She knew in that moment that this would likely be the last time she would try to reach out to her mother. It was a painful realization, but one that brought with it a sense of finality and closure. The wedding day arrived, and despite the emotional weight of her mother's absence, it was a beautiful day. Her father walked her down the aisle, his arm a steadying presence beside her. The ceremony was intimate, filled with genuine smiles, tears of joy, and the love of those who truly cared for her and Eric. It was a stark contrast to the grandeur and coldness of Mary's wedding, but Lauren wouldn't have had it any other way. The reception was a modest affair, but it was filled with warmth and laughter. There were no celebrities, no extravagant decorations, just close friends and family who were there to celebrate love. The room was filled with the sound of music, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of conversations. Eric and Lauren moved through the crowd, greeting guests, sharing stories, and soaking in the happiness that surrounded them. It was a day that would be etched in their memories forever. Life continued to move forward, and Lauren and Eric soon found themselves on the brink of a new adventure. They were expecting their first child. The news brought a wave of excitement and anticipation, and they threw themselves into preparing for the baby's arrival. They spent countless hours picking out paint colors for the nursery, assembling the crib, and buying tiny clothes that made their hearts swell with love. One bright and early Friday morning, Lauren was in the nursery, carefully folding the new baby clothes they had just bought. She took her time, running her hands over the soft fabrics, imagining the day she would dress her baby in these tiny outfits. Eric was in the corner, drilling something into the wall, the sound of the electric screwdriver filling the room. He paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and looked over at Lauren with a smile. "How's it going over there? Need any help?" he asked, his voice warm and full of affection. Lauren smiled back at him. "I've got it, thanks," she replied. "Just thinking about everything. It's really happening, huh?" "It really is," Eric said, his voice filled with awe and a hint of nervous excitement. "We're going to be parents, Lauren." As they shared that quiet moment, there was a knock at the door. Lauren was surprised. Who could be visiting this early on a Friday morning? Eric went to answer it while Lauren continued organizing the nursery, her mind still on the tiny onesies and booties she was putting away. A few moments later, Eric called out from the front of the house. "Lauren, it's for you." Curious, Lauren walked out of the nursery and into the living room. She was shocked to see her father standing there, a big grin on his face and a large teddy bear in his hands. "Surprise!" her father exclaimed, his eyes twinkling with joy. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Lauren asked, her face lighting up with delight as she rushed over to embrace him. "I couldn't wait any longer," he said, laughing as he hugged her back. "I wanted to come and see how my favorite daughter is doing. And I brought something for my future grandchild," he added, handing her the teddy bear. Lauren took the bear from him, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Dad. It means the world to me that you're here," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. They sat down in the living room, and her father looked around at the half-assembled baby furniture and the stacks of baby books. "Looks like you're almost ready for the little one," he remarked, a proud smile on his face. "We're trying," Lauren replied with a chuckle. "It's a lot, but we're excited." Her father nodded, his expression growing more serious. "I heard from your mother," he said gently. "She wasn't too happy about the last conversation you two had." Lauren sighed, the weight of that conversation still heavy on her mind. "No, she wasn't. But Dad, I had to stand my ground. I couldn't let her disrupt our lives, especially with the baby on the way. We need peace here," she said firmly. Her father reached out and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Lauren. It's not easy, but you're doing what's right for you and your family. That's what matters most." The day passed in a blur of warmth and love. They shared stories, laughed at her father's unsolicited but well-meaning parenting advice, and simply enjoyed being together. It was one of those days that Lauren knew she would look back on fondly for years to come. As the sun began to set, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the three of them, Lauren, Eric, and her father, sat on the porch, soaking in the tranquility of the evening. Eric put his arm around Lauren, and she leaned into him, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Despite everything with Mom, I feel so lucky," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "We have each other, and we're about to start this amazing new chapter. I just have a feeling it's going to be great." Eric kissed the top of her head, his voice full of reassurance as he replied, "It will be, Lauren. We've got this." As night fell and her father said his goodbyes, Lauren stood on the porch, watching him drive away. The challenges with her mother, the uncertainty of new beginnings, it had all been tough. But standing there, surrounded by the love of her husband and the support of her father, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. This was her fresh start, her new beginning, and she was going to make the most of it.